Cool. So, hi everybody. I'm Alexandria. I'm just going to be chatting about my work for a bit. So, the first thing I have up here is a quote that I would say is pretty central to my work. It's something that I return to over and over again. It's from an essay by Toni Morrison called Remembering. It says, history versus memory, and memory versus memorylessness. Memory as in recollecting and remembering, as in reassembling the members of the body, the family, the population of the past. It was the struggle, the pitched battle between remembering and forgetting that became the device of the narrative. And I feel like that encompasses a lot of what I'm trying to do in my practice, especially right now as I'm working with images of my family and sort of taking the bits and pieces that I do have and stories I have from family and things I'm able to pull from online to kind of be able to put things together, because there isn't always a super clear image about like who a person was or what they were like when they were around, or even where they were born or the exact year they were born. So being able to sort of piece together things is something that I'm constantly coming back to, and this quote really helps me when I'm trying to center back to sort of what I'm doing here. So there we go. So this is one of the first pieces I created for the show. It's titled "So I Gathered Up and Spread," and it's a screen print. And this screen print is of my great aunt Billie. So that's my grandmother's sister. And we're not sure what year the photo was taken, still working on finding that out. But so yeah, I screen printed this photograph on top of a vintage map of Arkansas. And I was really excited when I found the image, because I'm not sure, I mean, I've seen like pinup images and I feel like this is very reminiscent of this, but like when I think of my family and sort of like, I wouldn't say that they're the most, I'm not saying they're super like uptight or anything like that, but like I was surprised to see this image, just this woman like kind of doing this sort of this pose that's very reminiscent of that in this time period that's like obviously at least very far from now. So I was excited to see that and sort of see her taking up space even in that imagery. Like the fact that the picture even goes a little bit outside of the borders of the photograph was really interesting to me. And I do know that she was like born and raised like my grandmother for a period of time in Arkansas. So I was interested in this idea of her like literally spreading across Arkansas and taking up space across Arkansas, especially in the South and during the time that I'm assuming that she was there, in which like she was very much so not supposed to be taking up any space at all. And especially like this idea that it's kind of like a cheeky sort of thing too with this pose, where like I'm taking up space, yes, but also like, what are you gonna do about it? So I was really excited by seeing that kind of image. And I found another image of a great aunt of mine doing a similar pose. So like, I don't know, that might be something I kind of burrow into a little bit more as I get interested even in like Black pinup culture too. Yeah, and this is about 11 by 15. I definitely might do some more work with maps specifically. I think it's also an interesting way to sort of piece together those parts of your family and your lineage, just to get old maps from the time, like is, I don't know, I find it interesting to be able to look and like sort of literally pinpoint exactly where your family would have been and then what was surrounding them at the time. So any artifacts that really help you sort of piece together a part of a person's life, I'm very much interested in. Yeah. Are we doing questions at all? I should have asked that, or we just kind of going through?
Maybe we can do questions at the end.
Okay, sounds good. So this next slide I have is of the piece called "It Comes Back in Pieces," also known as dysphagia. And this is my great aunt Elizabeth on the left and her daughter Letha Walker. Great aunt Elizabeth on the right and her daughter Letha Walker on the left. And this is in Lake Village, Arkansas in 1925. And a lot of times when I'm checking these dates, these images are from like a family archive. They're not something I'm pulling offline. So I'm usually working with my great aunt, my great aunt Mary Louise, who was either like a very small child when some of these photos or things were taken, or they're photos that she inherited and was able to kind of piece together, be like, oh, this was from this year because I remember my mother telling me this or telling me this story and telling me people were still living back home in Arkansas at the time. So that's been really helpful to like just hear her talk about it and to actually be able to get these exact dates from her. So yeah, and I don't know, I was very interested in this photo because it was outside. Like it was, I feel like usually you see, if you do like a family photo, a lot of people will do like the indoor sort of thing. Like it's usually a very formal sort of idea, but the fact that they like grabbed a chair and was like, oh, we'll document ourselves in this moment was very exciting to me. And I was also talking to my great aunt about the fact that a lot of these photos that are taken like outdoors were in our family farm in Arkansas. And the farm, they also called it Luna. Not sure why, nobody really remembers why. But yeah, so this was taken on their farm in 1925. And I've also noticed that a lot of the women in my family, when they're taking pictures, like aren't smiling, is something that I'm also very interested in. Like, I think it's pretty badass personally, because like, I don't know, like just to see them like they're like, okay, we'll document ourselves, but like we're not gonna necessarily give you the privilege of a smile, which is very something I'm interested in. Because I mean, I smile in photos, but sometimes I won't, and I look exactly like this. So something I'm very interested in. But yeah, so I feel like this is a style I've been working in for about, I guess, a year or two now. And a lot of the work that other people might be familiar with, like from my Instagram or my website, where I'm sort of tearing at things to create another image behind an image or on top of another image. So I was interested in what that would look like with this photo, particularly because I'm always thinking about the layers in an image. Like an image, of course, it's just this 1D like artifact, but there's always more to it behind that, like a story or a narrative, or somebody has something to say about it. So I put these different pieces of images that were found images from other parts of Arkansas behind the image to think about perhaps maybe where these women in my family had been prior, places that they have probably traveled through or to. Just to kind of give the image some more like depth and thinking about these people actually moving around in time and space. And leaving some things to the imagination, because of course there's like a ton that I don't know, but I'm excited about the idea to allude to these ideas of like, perhaps I don't know these things, but gesturing to that point in time and space. So I was very interested in being able to do that, and particularly with a family photo. So that's probably something I'll continue to try to do. So yeah, and that one, this is the largest piece I had in the show. So it's 28 inches by 39 and a half. Yeah. Next one. Here we go. They called it Luna. So yeah, just like I said previously, the family farm back in Arkansas, like it was in a place, like they called it Luna, don't know why. So this is my great grandma, Pauline Elsie Donald on the left, and her daughter, Evelyn Donald on the right. And this was in 1940. So it's an archival show that I was able to get from my great aunt, who's been doing a lot of the archival work before me, which is also something that I'm excited about. The fact that, I mean, Black women and Black people especially have just been doing this archiving work before anybody was calling it archiving, this idea of we were here, we are here, we'll take our own pictures. Like we don't need somebody to come in and take the pictures for us, and we'll keep them for ourselves and we'll preserve them. Cause I mean, these are really old photos. So yeah, so it's approximately 8.5 by 11. And I also like really love eBay. So I'm always searching for found imagery on eBay too, which is a really nice place, I say, to find imagery of like the South, like previous vintage imagery of the South, which is what's happening in the very top of this photograph. Because on both sides of my family, so I have folks from Arkansas and I also have folks from Mississippi. So a lot of times I'm searching for imagery from both places. And this image actually was from a place called Monticello, Arkansas. And it was interesting because it looked very much like an estate, like very different from the space that I was thinking, like imagining my family in. And so I was interested in sort of juxtaposing them on their farm versus this other place that looked very much like an estate, and kind of flipping that upside down to create the sky for where they were existing at. And I feel like that raises a lot of questions about class and about identity. Yeah, and about existing and like where you're able to exist and the places you're not able to exist or where people don't want you to exist. Um, yeah, so I mean, this is part of my exploration with working with my family imagery, and it's been interesting. I think felt a little bit more precious about it than I had with previous images that I was working with. But I'm getting past that and being able to work with him in these sorts of ways. So I'm excited about that. Sure, that's the last slide for me.
I don't know, do I just jump in?
Yeah, cool, that's fine.
Okay, because I was like, I don't know if I should, okay. I did want to talk to you about one image, if you could go to the larger print with this one.
Yep.
I think it's really interesting, especially to, you said that your family, they took these images themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something really interesting within that, because I feel like, especially with a lot of archive photos, it seems like with a lot of Black Americans, you don't see us taking our own photos. It's usually someone documenting us. So I think to have these family photos of your family on their farm, taking the photo the way they want to, position the way they want to, I just think it's something really powerful within that, taking that agency to, I guess, taking control of their representation in an image. I think that's something really special about that, especially for the time.
For sure, yeah, that's definitely something that I'm just interested in when it comes to archive in general. Is sort of like the structure, like the structure around archive as we think of it. Like a lot of times, like you said, with Black Americans, it's like somebody else coming into our communities and like we're like a study, you know, or something,
Mm-hmm.
and being like, let me take these pictures of these Black people. So, and like, you're like, okay, for what though? Like, where are you taking them to, and like, who's going to see them? Like, most of the time, the people who are in the photos wouldn't even have access to the actual archive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's definitely something I'm getting at too in my practice, and like making imagery accessible to the people who like are actually in the images, like the folks from the lineage. But yeah, I'm super excited about that too, especially because I'm like, I don't know, it makes you think about, I'm trying to remember who this quote is by. Is it Zora Neale Hurston? It might have been Alice Walker, actually, where she's talking about these women in our families, specifically Black women, like being artists, but maybe not necessarily having the means or living in a time in which they could be artists. So they're doing things like this where like we're like, okay, we're gonna stage a photo of ourselves on our own farm, like to take these pictures because that is the outlet to be able to be an artist. Like you're not like necessarily in 1925 gonna be like a Black woman that's like, I'm gonna be a painter like down south,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But you can go in like your backyard or on your farm and like take photos, you know.
Definitely. And I think it's badass too that they're not smiling either. It's like, yeah, I'm taking my photo and I'm gonna look just like this.
Exactly.
And I just think that's really cool, especially too with the ripping away. I was taking notes. Like the ripping away of the image and then having another image layer under there. We talked about this a little bit. I think we were installing.
Mm-hmm.
I think of like and it's a French word and I'm gonna butcher it, but like décollage or decollage,
Yeah.
where it's like you're removing things from the image. And it's so interesting because when you look at a photograph, there are layers to it. We understand there are layers to it, you know, because of the time frame of it, because of like the clothes someone is wearing or who is in the image or where the image is taking place, but then to actually show that physically and really see like in the image, like there really are so many layers within this photo, you know. And it's interesting about like just focusing on the landscape of Arkansas, you know, within this and like how that contributes to one's experience and history. And yeah, I really love this piece. Especially to the scale and everything of it. And I told you this before, but I just wanted to like talk to you about that, and especially like that method of physically showing the layers within an image and like how many layers can be, you know, within a photograph.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's another reason why I love your work, because it's almost like happening in reverse, where there are these layers that are being placed on top of it with the chemicals that you're using on top of the photos. And like, it's interesting to ask like to beg the question, like what how does that change the image, and like what questions is that pointing to in your work? Yeah, so right back at you.
Yeah, I guess this is a good segue to get into my
Yeah.
work.
Yeah,
Let me see. I'm going to share my screen. I'm gonna let y'all know now. It's been a week. I have things. So I don't have a slideshow, but I do have things to show. Just to let y'all know, it's not like. So yeah, we're gonna go on a journey, y'all. But yeah, let me see. Okay. So I wanted to start off from like the top and then work into how I got into the works I did for the show. Can everyone hear me? Am I lagging at all? Okay. It seemed a little lagging on my end. I'm just trying to make sure. Okay. So this work started with my grandmother and going through some of her archive, I would say, or just going through our family photos. So my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. I would say within the past like 5-6 years, they diagnosed her. So I was just kind of going through some of our family photos and just asking her questions and just trying to get as much information as possible about, I guess, our family history. And she could tell me a few things, like she could tell me a few details here and there, but as far as recollecting like who all was in the photos or just trying to recall certain events, she couldn't fully do that. So I wanted to create an experience for, I guess, the viewer or the audience to where it was that same kind of idea of trying to recollect or trying to make sense of something, but not having the full picture. So I started playing around with darkroom chemicals, and I found this toner, I guess you would call it. And the original purpose for this toner is to preserve an image. So you put it through the entire process of just like the darkroom process, and you use this toner at the end to preserve the image. But in this instance, I'm using it to do the opposite, which deteriorates the image. So these are a few of like the first kind of like tone prints that I was working with. Let me see. There it is. So yeah, some of just the first few toned prints, just playing around with it. I was thinking a lot about time and memory and just thinking about the effects of time as we live our lives, as we grow older, and just thinking about the things that do get altered as far as details and events and how we remember certain things and how we, experience things and how that then impacts the way we remember something initially. So something that you remember when you were 13, it may change as you're 23 or 33 and things like that. So I was thinking a lot about that as I was moving through this work and as I was, making these prints. I would reprint a lot of my, or pretty much everything, all the photos that I was finding in my grandmother's archive. And then I would reprint on a certain type of photo paper and then put this solution on there, and then it would have this effect. When I first started doing this work, it was late 2019. And it was coming out more red, more orange. And now that I'm doing this work, it's starting to come out more purple and gray, as I'll show you guys like with the works from the show. But this is kind of like the first initial prints. And I also started using paint a little bit and just kind of seeing like how that looks with the work and seeing like how that also impacts how the work was being seen. But this is like very, very early work, like experimentation. So yeah, that's pretty much like how all of this started out. So then going to the work in the show. So this is, let me see. This was originally in a grid, but now in the show it's in a line. And it's pretty much one image. They all make one image, but one of the pieces don't fit in like the total image. So the image is supposed to be of a birthday cake, or not birthday cake, but a cake of graduation. And this image is not from that original work. So this is like the top left corner of like, you see someone like holding it like a man with a tie, and like the bottom or the top of the cake. And then the next image is like the right side, and it's like another corner of the cave. And then this is a little more distorted with the toner and everything. But then this image was not originally part of that entire thing. This is from a completely different photograph. But I put it in there because, again, just thinking about memory and the way that we remember, and how, and also too, just thinking about truth in a sense, because again, I don't think no one really pointed it out to me while, like, during the opening, like, oh, like, I don't think that this belongs here. So I guess this is my first time really like working within this type of, not medium, but just working in this way with this work, with breaking up the image and having it separated like this. Just thinking about the way that we piece together memory and piece together just, I don't know, like fragments essentially, because that's history. That's, how we understand things. We just get fragments of things. And who's to know like what exactly is the truth? It's just what we know, and we just have to build off of that. And I think there's a potential there. As I was continuing to work with this, I guess with this iteration of work, and just thinking about like how I relate to my grandmother and her experience and everything, I was asking her questions about people in the photograph and like, her memories growing up, and just trying to get as much information as I could as possible while I still could. And my grandmother was a very reserved woman. So I'd be like, oh, like, tell me about, when you met my grandfather and how was that? And she'd be like, it's fine. It was fine. It was nice. He was a nice man. We got married, but she would never really go into depth about any of the details really, unless I really pulled it out of her. So then I had to revisit this work and think, okay, am I trying to force something that isn't there? Not saying that, everything is gonna lie up until this point, but it's more so just thinking about, I guess, me more so than trying to recreate my grandmother's experience. Because I guess my experience with this work is I only have fragments of my family history. I can only go back so far. My grandmother was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1927. And before that, her grandparents came from Louisiana, and her family never talked about what happened in Louisiana. She asked a few times and they would just kind of shoo her away. And she was at peace with that. Like, okay, well, if it's not meant for me to know, then it's not meant for me to know. And that just racked my brain for a really long time, because there's so much that I just want to know about my history to piece together. And I was trying so hard to figure out my family history and trying to figure out like what exactly, where do I come from? What contributes to, my history and who I am as a person? And I don't know if it's meant for me to know or to understand. So I guess thinking about that, it's like, okay, I only have like these fragments, I only have this little bit of information. But even with only having this little bit of information, even the information that I don't have, that all still contributes to who I am as a person in my history and how I move forward. And I think about that too in a greater context with, I guess, just being a Black American and our experience within like America as far as slavery really, like, I'm trying to find an eloquent way to say this, but we're like, lack of a better term, is pretty much like we really don't have access to a lot of history and a lot of who we were before slavery. Like there's some things you can do, like the ancestry test, but again, like everything's just fragments. But then still look at how much has come from that. As far as, the good, the bad, whatever, it's just, there's so much that comes from that still, and there's potential within that. So I guess I just think about that, or I'm thinking about that now with this work, and thinking about what is the potential within the loss of information, within fragments of information. So that's kind of where this work is headed now. Yeah. So this is one of the works. This is of my Uncle Mike. And this is him when he was, I would say, sometime in the mid-50s, I would say, just a young boy. This is in front of our garage at our family home. I'm still in my family home to this day. So if you see like a home in the background of some of these photos, this house, my grandfather had bought this for my grandmother when they got married, and we just raised, like, they raised their family and so on and so forth. So yeah, looking at this picture, again, I'm just thinking about my relation to this more so than like my grandmother's experience now. Because I see my Uncle Mike and I didn't know him that long. He passed when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So to see a photo like this, and it's like trying to get to know him, I guess, through images and trying to get to know him through family discussions and conversations. And yeah, just like using the toner and I don't know, just thinking about all these things as I'm, I guess, going through this work. And it's a lot that I'm still trying to make sense of and trying to figure out. And it's kind of hard to revisit sometimes because again, it's just trying to settle with the fact of like, there's just some things I'm just not going to know. So yeah, with this work, I started off with just like a general layer of the toner. And then as it started kind of developing in a certain type of way, then I would focus in on other areas to make it a little more heavier. And that's what resulted in this work. And then this is like part of like the smaller works. This is probably the first few prints that I started doing for this show. Again, this is one of those things where like the toner, I'm used to it coming out as like red or orange or yellow, and now it's coming out more purple and more gray. And even too, just trying to figure out the toner, and it's all part of like this huge process of just trying to navigate and figure out like, okay, like what exactly is happening and being settled with, okay, things may not happen the way you expect it to, but then just trying to have peace with that and then move on with that, or trying to continue to like, you know, make work with this. So yeah, this is in the middle is my Uncle Mike. Right here is my Uncle George. And then I'm not sure if these are, you know, just kids from the neighborhood or if they're kids that were in our family. But again, it's just trying to like figure out and navigate these types of questions, like who are these people? How do I connect with them? How does like the archive transform as it gets passed on from generation to generation? Because how will my kids interact with this? I can tell them like, oh yeah, these are my uncles when they were younger, but I didn't know, you know, like I don't have any context for when they were kids outside of the things that my grandparents told me or things that my mom might tell me. But other than that, like I only have so much context. So then how does that transform as that gets passed on to like my kids or their kids? So yeah. This is one of the first works, like when you first walk into the show. I think this is also on the, I think the promo for the show as well. So this is in our family home. This is our garage. This is my Uncle Mike, my Uncle George. And again, I believe like kids in the neighborhood that came over to play. This is, and again, one of those things where it's like I'm looking at the toner and it's like, okay, it's starting to do like some yellow, but now some purple and some gray. But I just really love the texture of it. I really love how it started doing this kind of gradient in the sky. It reminds me kind of like golden hour or like a sunset or something like that. And I don't know, because again, like the image is in black and white, so I don't know what time of day it was exactly when this was taken. But it's just kind of interesting to see this, I guess, contrast of like not knowing and then me, I guess, bringing my own projection, I guess, to the image and trying to just like figure out again like my family history and how I relate to this work and like what may have been happening within the image like when it was taken. I think that's it. I think I showed all my prints. That is pretty much my work and everything. Is pretty much all, it's very focused on just experience and me trying to figure out my family history and trying to, I guess, just navigate certain questions that I don't have the answers to. So I feel like whenever I do discuss my work, I sound very confused. And I feel like that's kind of like the whole process of or I just think the process with this work is just trying to navigate confusion and just trying to figure out exactly, again, like how I relate to something that I only have so much context for, and then how that again transforms throughout the years as these things are passed on. So yeah.
I'll jump in if that's okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking about conversation we had when we were installing, and sort of what you mentioned too about how the images kind of can change over time, like when it comes to color and like gradient, thing like that. And it just, I'm not sure if I mentioned it when we were installing, but I think it's like interesting in the way that it mirrors the way that memory works, like how you mentioned that memory is sort of always changing depending on who's telling the story. Really, like it could be like somebody's tired and they're telling you a story, so they left out something even if it was very important. But I think that's really cool that the work kind of like took that upon itself to like shift in that way, in the way that memory does work, in which like there are things always being added or taken away. And the story we get 2 weeks from now is definitely not the story we're going to get in a year, so I think that's really interesting.
Thank you. And yeah, definitely. That's definitely like going into this work, things that I was considering is like the way that just memory and how we remember transforms over time. And I just really love how the toner does that with as as it sits on this photo, it just slowly starts to change and transform. So it may start off this color, but it may end up another color. I have some of the prints that I showed from my earlier work in 2019, like those prints are more on like a grayish brownish type of color now, more so than like that pigmented red. And I think too, it's interesting as far as like mixing, I guess, again, like this archive, but then also like this very digital reproduction of images. And again, like how does that then transform? Because with me scanning these images, and it's kind of like I'm taking like a snapshot of like how this toner will look at this point in time, like how it looks in this image. It may not look like that next year, So just thinking about also like that as well in relation to memory. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's also like a sort of poetry in the idea of like the idea that there are missing pieces, but that you do get to be an active like participant in the memory because you are like taking it from the archive and deciding to like interact with it in that way, So like in a sense, you're filling in some gaps because you're there and you are a part of that lineage. So I think that maybe that's something nice to hold on to.
Yeah, definitely. And it feels nice to, I guess, have some type of interaction with it that doesn't feel so passive.
Yeah.
As far as like I feel like I'm really engaging with my grandmother's archive, like with my family archive, and it doesn't feel so much as if like, okay, this happened, and then it's like, okay, now what do I do, or like what do I do with this now? So it feels nice to be able to allow the images to continue to live on and kind of bring this newer context without just completely rewriting like my family history, but just having some type of like dialogue with everything. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think, I guess that's part of the reason why I started the work in the first place is like being like, I want to participate like in some way. Like, it's not a lot of things. Like, I'm not going to have all the answers or all the dates or even all the names, but being able to participate in that way is like soothing somehow.
Definitely. Do you see this work taking another iteration, do you think? Like a different way of like how you display or how you kind of transform, or how do you see the work, I guess, transforming over time, I guess?
Yeah, I would love for it to be different iterations. That's something I think about too, where I'm like, when I think about my practice, like at large, like in over a course of years, I'm like, okay, there's only so many photos. So like, and I've worked with archival images from like the Black Trust magazine, like that's not my family, but these images of Black people. So I feel like I'll definitely probably keep tapping into different archives, even outside of my family archive, but I think I'm going to continue to work in my family archive in different ways, and perhaps ways of like collage or perhaps in photography and sort of mimicking some of the images that I'm seeing and recreating them in my own way. So I do want to sort of see what different ways I can take to expand the work. And even doing some writing about it, because that is also a part of my practice. So I'm trying to like move a little slower, I say, because I think in the past, like especially just in the beginning of the pandemic too, I just wanted to like make things to sort of like get that sort of nervous energy out. So that was very early in my practice, just especially with the work being smaller, being able to be like, okay, like this took me 30 minutes or something, or like this, very quickly doing it. And it was really more so just for me, like I only started like posting on Instagram because my friend was like, you should get Instagram again. And I was like, I kind of hate it, but like, okay. Sure. So yeah, it wasn't like necessarily some big master plan. So like, I'm like, okay, well, I can take a step back and like shift gears. Like, even though that's the way I was working before, I feel like it's more beneficial to me now to like slow down and more so just like sit with the images and figure out what I want to do and maybe plan things out more. Cause I think I had less of a plan before, more just like feeling, and now I want to kind of combine those two things. So I'll see what happens, because I'm very interested in photography too. Like, I think just looking at the images too makes you want to go take photos, because you're like, this is so cool that like, that there's this artifact now because they decided to take this picture in Arkansas in 1925. Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in sort of like starting in the middle of what I have now, but finding like these different ways to kind of draw out from it. And that might be photo, that might be writing, probably some more collages. Yeah, but I also want to learn different techniques and things too, so I can kind of branch out of what I've been doing. Yeah, how do you feel about your work? Like, do you think you're going to continue in like the line of inquiry, or?
I would like to continue with like more iterations of this work, but I think it may start shifting more. It may shift from a representational aspect. Like I might start taking some of my family archive out of it and start focusing more on the effects of the toner. But we'll see how that goes. Because again, it's one of those things where like when I first started using this toner, I didn't know exactly what to expect. It was kind of a happy accident almost. Like I knew I wanted to create this type of effect, but then to see the type of effect it had, I'm like, oh wow, okay, let's keep going. And I think that was a little more intuitive when I first started with the work. And I'm with you as far as like just being a little more intentional. Like, okay, like at first this was like, okay, we're just kind of like doing something, but now it's like, okay, making it a little more focused, and I guess taking elements of the work and of this work and creating something from that. So I definitely see the work taking on that aspect as far as like just still thinking about memory and time, and I guess like my relationship to it all, especially too because like even though like looking back at my grandmother's archive and like my family history, it's also like I'm still like a living person in today's world, and I'm, no matter what I do, there's like I'm making memories every day. So then like thinking about how I relate to that, and how I relate to the future, and like how do I see the future, what do I want the future to look like, and just seeing how these things kind of relate to each other. So we'll see how that works. And especially too, like I feel you with the whole Instagram thing, where it's like, okay, because that's a whole other topic. But also too, another reason why I think I want to start moving away from work that's representational is because at least with my family archive, because I'm still trying to navigate having like my family works within like I guess like a marketplace.
Yeah.
And like having that and like balancing that, like with selling things to people, but it's like, this is my family, you know what I'm saying? Like these are like, this is like my family members, so it's like trying to navigate that as well. I have been doing more work with public archives. Like I've been spending a lot of time on like Library of Congress and doing some projects from photos I'm finding on that archive. But yeah, I feel like there's still some things I would like to think about as I move forward, but I definitely see like another iteration coming from this. And I'm interested to see what that ends up looking like, because it is a little newer for me, because a lot of my past work has been more like portraiture. So moving away from that will be interesting. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. I think like things and projects that like start from like sort of a happy accident, or kind of like just that initial like intuition is like some of the best work. So like I feel like it means that there is a lot to tap into, So yeah, I'm excited to see it too. Should we do other questions here? I'm like
Yeah, we had a question. We really love the book that you made for the show that's in the space.
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about that and how that came about.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, writing is a part of my practice. I feel like I try to do both at the same time. Like that's not necessarily fully happening right now, but that's something I'm trying to get to, like to sort of merge those two things. So part of that was that I wanted to be able to include writing and like, I mean, writing is important to me because of the aspect of like such deep reflection and like it can be guided reflection as well. And I think I wanted to be able to provide that for folks. Like they're coming to see our families in the way that we're engaging with our own personal archives. But I think I wanted people to be able to walk away with something specifically for themselves. And yeah, just to be able to walk out into the world and have something for themselves too, like not just taking our families and how we feel with them, but to take away like how they feel too was important for me.
Definitely. I really appreciate your like invitation for other people to experience the same thoughts about home and also grounding like their memories and their experiences and letting them kind of have their own thoughts and feelings about that.
Thank you.
I have a question
Mhm.
for Billie. So how did the toner change color? Did you change the product or the way that you applied it? What was the process that made it go from the orange to the purple?
I wish I had an answer. No, because honestly, it's one of those things that I'm like still trying to figure out also because I've been using the same type of toner, same type of brushes, like same everything, but it'll just be some days, and it could be like the ink. I do think that the type of ink that's used also has like something to do with it as well. Because like when I was first doing this work, I was still in my grad program at SAIC. So I was using like their printers and things like that. So when I was using their printers, things were coming out more like orange, red, things like that. But then like moving back home and like using my own printers and my own things, like I've been noticing more. It still comes out a little red here and there. Then I have other prints that'll come out more purple or come out more gray. So it's interesting because me and Alex were talking about this. Alex suggested like I need to hook up with like a scientist or something to like talk about this and figure out like what exactly is like the like chemical like breakdown or whatever that would make it one print look red and another print look purple. And then there's some instances where I'll like tone an image and typically the next day I'll see a reaction. And then there's just sometimes where I'll put the toner on and the next day it looks like I did nothing to it. And I'm just like, what is this? And it sucks when I have a deadline. And it's like, okay, I needed to do something because I'm trying to get this done for this certain thing. But it's interesting because then it's like with those prints, the first few days, there may not be anything, but then over like, let's say a week or two, it ends up getting like this real crystallized kind of look to it. And I think it looks beautiful, but again, like it just takes more time. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly why certain colors come out on certain days or with certain prints and they don't come out the same way with others. Because I use the same process the entire way, but it's just has different reactions. So, and it's an interesting process because it's like, okay, this is how the work is coming out. How do I adjust and how do I continue to, work with this to get it to be however, I see it in my head. So yeah, it's an interesting process for sure.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I also wanted to mention how adorable it was for install for you two with your dads helping you install your show. It was just so lovely. And to know that we were part of you two meeting, I think was also really wonderful. And that your parents ended up being friends. So
yeah, they had like they looked like they had a really good conversation, like, because they really started getting into some stuff. I was like, oh, okay. But also, I just want to say too that I couldn't think of anyone better to do a show with. Alex has been amazing this whole time. Like one of the kindest people I have ever met, an amazing artist, so thoughtful. I'm just thankful to have been chosen to do this show with you, and just thank you for just having me be a part of this, because you didn't have to. So just thank you for just even allowing me to be a part of this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for like being, because I mean, I had known your work. I think I maybe was even following you on Instagram beforehand, but like I was like, oh, this would be really cool to like know this person, but I'm an introvert. So I'm like, I guess I'll never know them. You know? So it's been great working with you too, for sure.
Yes, definitely same. And I'm glad we finally got to meet in person. This has been in the works for like a year. And it's like we just met like I think a couple days before the show, like in person, face to face. So it was nice to have that interaction too, and struggling through install together, trying to put everything up. So yeah, it's just been like an amazing experience, like through and through.
For sure. Same here.
Does anyone else have any questions for our artist today?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sharing your beautiful work. One of my questions is, this can go to both of you. In like what ways, like negotiating with the archives, do you feel like you're like in communion with them? Like what messages are they telling you? Like what stories are you gathering from them? Like how are you communing with your ancestors through these images?
Well, I think one of the first things for me that I'm thinking about is sort of what Billie and I were talking about before, is like just taking imagery of yourself and of your family is extremely important, even if sometimes you feel, I think it can be easy to take advantage of a moment, to be in a moment and be like, oh, I'll see this person next week, or I've known this person for 20 years, like, you know, but I think it is very important to think about like what our ancestors were doing. And like, they just had that intuitive knowledge to know, like, we have to document ourselves, you know, and whether they were verbalizing that or not, there was something going on mentally or emotionally to say like, we need to make sure that people know that we were here. And I think for me, that's something that I'm definitely getting from the images, because I'm like, some of the imagery that I'm seeing, like I would have never in a million years thought up like my great aunts like in a chair, like outside in their farm, like, you know, so to be able to take that away and be like, yeah, it is very important, even if it seems very day to day and mundane to us now to document ourselves. Yeah, and I think the idea of being able to just like take away, like not take away, maybe isn't the word, but to hold those emotions and those feelings of hearing those stories about your ancestors too. Like, I mean, the only reason I feel like I'm hearing a lot of the stories about my ancestors is because I'm going to my aunt and being like, do you have photos? Like, can I scan them? Like, and she's like, oh yeah, sure. And I'm like, okay, wait, who is this? Like, and where is this from? And like, she's telling me these stories because I'm kind of taking that trek to say like, let me go to your house. Let's take these photos that she's like, oh, they're in the basement in some plastic bag. And now I have to go find them. Like, it kind of opens up this whole new layer of like an archive experience. So I feel like I hope I answered your question, but yeah, I think it's really just pointing me to like the idea of like the mundane isn't necessarily so mundane, and it really opens up different ways to connect with your family in the present. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree. I think with just working with my archive, I feel like there were a lot of things that were unsaid, or just seeing the things that my grandmother chose to document and chose to save. I was able to learn more about her and things that were important to her, because again, my grandmother was just not a very like talkative person, or just she didn't share a lot. She was very private. So she wasn't one of those that'd be like, oh, let's sit down and let's have a conversation about, back in the day. She'd just be like, okay, what about it? She wasn't really a person that dwelled too much in the past, which was like kind of surprising. I'm like, you lived through a lot, so I would imagine you would have a lot to say. But I was able to, I think, learn more about her through the things that she chose to keep. Even if she didn't say anything about them, I was able to see how important they were to her. Like I saw a lot of work that she did. Like she's very community oriented. She did a lot of work with a bunch of different like Black churches within Milwaukee, of just different denominations, and just always just a part of something. She's always at some event, she like, even like going through her photos, I was able to see like old pamphlets and old bulletins and things from like services that she's been to and events that she's been to. She worked with like a girls group up here. She did a lot of work with like Divine Nine, like sororities, and just, even though she wasn't in one herself. So it was just interesting to see, because I had no idea like she had connections to like Deltas. I'm like, you know, you're not even a Delta. You have no connection to this. Like, how did this happen? But I guess just seeing the things that really meant a lot to her. And even too, she traveled a lot. She tried to travel a lot. So just looking through a lot of her like travel photos and seeing like she would be in a hotel room, like acting like she was on the phone. And this stuff felt like, why did you say that? You know, like you have a whole, like you're in Europe right now and there's like a whole landscape out there, but you in the hotel room. Like, so it's interesting, like the things that were important to her. And again, like those mundane things. And thinking about like, again, like when I take photos, I realized that I've stopped taking as many photos of just like myself and my experiences. But then just thinking about like the things that I would like to pass on to like my children and my grandchildren one day. Because when I see my grandparents and I see my, you know, like people in my family just doing mundane things, it means the world to me to be able to see that, even though I may not have the full context for it, just to be able to like see like, oh, they were doing this, or oh, they were just sitting on the porch doing whatever. Like, it means a lot to me. So I don't know. I just think about, again, like how I guess, how do these things move on to me? So like, this is how they chose to document their life. So then knowing that, how do I document my life? How does that then influence how I document things and how I keep track of things? And then how does that then, you know, move on to the next generation? So yeah, I hope I answered the question, but yeah.
That was a great question and great responses too. Does anyone else have any last questions for artists? All right, well, thank you both so much. It's been so amazing hearing more about your work. It's a beautiful show. It really is. So if
Thank
anyone on the
you.
call is in Chicago, we're open today until 6 p.m. Our hours weekly are Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 1 to 6, and then Sunday, 1 to 5. And this show is going to be up until July 10. So we're super excited to have it for a few more weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, come by, come see us. We'll give you a tour. Now that we know everything, we know all the secrets.
Totally. And yeah, we can't express enough how beautiful it is to work with you both and just see your connection. It really, you can feel it in the work, you can feel it in your connections together. So we're just so grateful.
Thank you. Thanks so much for making it an easy process.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. This talk is going to be recorded and it's going to be on our website and our Instagram soon.
Yes.
So thank you all. Have a great
Thank
rest of your
you.
day.
Thank you.
Goodbye.